have to be patient with us. We're kind of using new technology. But the hardest part is actually getting it on your face. You know, I did this earlier without a hitch. And now, I don't know if like my ears grew. Okay. Also, there'll be a little bit of transitioning. Okay. If you don't know who I am, because I know that we've been having a lot of kind of newer people come. I think I recognize almost everyone out here. My name is Ezra. Hi, Dave. And if you're wondering, why is he wearing a jacket? Well, it's because, you know, I'm not originally from here. I know it's hard to tell. It's even harder to tell who my mom is. Like, if you don't know me, you don't know my family, I would give you $10 if you could, you know, guess her. It's actually a lot of fun when we go, you know. Huh? You've already met her, Ninny. You're cheating. This is the house of God, Ninny. Yeah. But it's really fun because, you know, the other day she was in the county that I work in, and she was over there. She owns her own business, and one of the things that she does is she teaches. So I'm just filling time as I get all my notes and everything together. She teaches these workshops, and she was at a Subway, actually, in this county, and one of my coworkers was there because I work in EMS, and we like to eat a lot. It's one of the things we do best. And he was talking, and she said, "Oh, you know, you work for so-and-so district." And he's like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Oh, my son works there." And he was like, "Well, who's your son?" He said, "Ezra." And she said that he actually didn't believe her. So, yeah. All right, well, if you guys will turn to Psalm 89, that's where we're going to be tonight. Thank you for your patience as we transitioned over here. Psalm 89 is my most ambitious psalm to teach yet, in that it is a whopping 52 verses. Yes. As my track record has already proven, that when someone hears I'm going to be talking over 52 verses, the proper response is, "Oh, dang." I know, I'm just messing with you. Okie dokie. So, you know, it's kind of funny. I don't know if you've ever really talked with a lot of men, particularly from Southern California, but if you talk to them and they get in groups of more than one, it's this phenomenon happens where they use the word man like every 1.5 seconds. And they use that word more than I've ever thought man could be used in a sentence. And like my dad and Brian, if they get together, it's man every other second. Well, I was talking with Brian earlier today, and we were kind of talking about the Psalms, and we were talking, and I'm, you know, not from here, but I'm also not from California. I'm confused, so he like wants to use the word man with me, but it just doesn't like sink in, and I typically look at him like, why are you saying it so much? But the good part of our conversation was that we were talking about this particular psalm and just kind of going over it, and, you know, he said something that I really liked. He said that when it comes to the Psalms, you know, they're huge, it's a massive book, but the cool thing about the Psalms is every single one of them is livable, and I love that. The Psalms are a livable book. And actually, if you'll go ahead and switch to the next slide, Eric, I have some just kind of fun facts for you. You know, the Psalms, you've got 7 authors, you have 150 chapters, 5 books or subunits inside of the book. It's 2,461 verses. Surprisingly, it's not actually, and if I'm wrong on this, please come up to me and tell me. I thought I did a good job on all of my study work. But surprisingly, it's not the largest book in the Bible. For volume, Jeremiah actually outweighs the Psalms. But as far as chapter sections, it is the longest in that sense. And to me, what's most interesting about this book is that it was written over a time period of like 1,000+ years. One of the earliest Psalms that we have will actually, Pastor Mike will be covering this Sunday, Psalm 90, which is a Psalm of Moses. And so that, from there, we have one of our earliest Psalms there, and then they go all the way to the post-exilic times when Israel's coming back into Jerusalem and going to set up the kingdom again after a 70-year captivity in Babylon. And, you know, I look at this book as kind of like it's the book of the human heart, because it's so massive, it's so big in scope. It covers, 1,000+ years. It's written by so many different people. from different levels, different ranks, royalty, priesthood, and then we have 50 psalms that were orphan psalms that could have been written by, we don't know who, And the thing I love about that is that every season in life, and especially now, it's a good time to talk about seasons as we're going into fall, and fall is dying sadly, and winter's coming along at a steady clip. But life is full of seasons. Life is full of things that start and then end, and then start and then end again, and start and then end again, right? And the Psalms mirrors that. The Psalms actually matches that lifelong experience, and that anything that you're going through in life, it's like that old phrase, back whenever the iPhone was new, and people were, kind of enthralled by this revolutionary idea of applications, taking a whole program and putting it in an easy-to-use app. There's an app for that. The Psalms is kind of that thing, like whatever you're going through, there's a psalm for that, right? If you're experiencing victory and triumph, there's a psalm for that. If you're experiencing defeat and you're just crushed, well, guess what? There's a psalm for that as well. And that kind of segues into what we're looking at tonight as we look at a contemplation of Ethan the Ezrahite. This guy, for the sake of time, I'm not actually going to go into a lot of his history, but I will say that reading through this psalm, it's easy to see this guy's spiritual status. This guy knows what he's talking about. In my opinion, he is a great man of God. He's a man that I look forward to meeting someday in heaven. It's a long psalm. It's written into two, really, I break it into about 4 different sections. Verses 1 through 37, we have a proclamation of faith, and then verses 38 through 51, we kind of have a complaint that's brought up before God, and then verse 52, we have a just ending kind of benediction, but really I give that its own section because verse 52 is really, really important to the lesson that this psalm is trying to get across. And we'll talk about that a little later. But I bring all that up about the Psalms and how when we go through seasons in life, we can relate to certain chapters, and we can do this through this beautifully written book, because here we see a man who is a man of faith. He's a man that has proven himself. He's a man that knows God. You can tell he spent lots and lots of time at the feet of the Father, and yet here we see a psalm about this great man of faith who is met with something that shakes him to his very core. He deals with an issue that doesn't just challenge him, it challenges everything that he's about, down to his very identity. This thing that he didn't see coming, he didn't expect to have to deal with. And I think G. Campbell Morgan put it best when he said, taken as a whole, this psalm is one of the finest in the collection as a revelation of how the man of faith is compelled to view calamity. So with that said, let's start into our journey. Verse 1, I will sing of the mercies of the Lord forever. With my mouth I will make known your faithfulness to all generations. For I have said, mercy shall be built up forever. Your faithfulness you shall establish in the very heavens. So I already mentioned that verse 1 through 37 is a declaration of faith, where we see really who this guy is. We see a look into his heart. And I like that verse 1 through 2 is unique to me in that he doesn't just start out on the right foot. Because I've already said this is a psalm about a complaint. This is a psalm about almost an unsurmountable obstacle that's meeting this godly man and how he deals with it. But verse 1 and 2 I love because there he says, first, I will sing of the mercies of the Lord forever. And then he talks about his faithfulness and then mentions his mercy again and says, your faithfulness you shall establish in the very heavens. And I put there, this guy had the right view of what was going on in the, you could say, the cosmic view of things between God and man. And that is that he understood it was God to man. That is the relationship that he was dependent on. And actually, if we won't have time to read through all 37 verses, but if you were to go through those, and I encourage you to, because they're an encouraging read, you don't ever find him talking about his own faithfulness. You don't ever find him talking about how, he's been a good this or a good that or anything like that. He relies 100% on the mercy and the faithfulness of God, and right out the door, he's reaffirming that faith. He's saying, God, I stand on your mercy and your mercy alone. And I love that picture of mercy because, and you guys don't have to turn, I'm just turning my Bible real quick, but because we all know what is mercy. If I knew the Jeopardy song, I'd sing it right now. Yeah, there we go. Look at Kelly Mingy. She's so good. Okay, so yeah. So not giving us what we do deserve, right? That's mercy. And grace, as you all know, is getting what we don't deserve. So in mercy, I love that picture because it reminds me of, it speaks to the fact that this guy knows truly the heart of God, okay? And this heart of God is to forgive because he chooses to forgive. And it's simple and it's profound, but I love the picture that we find in Romans 5:10, where there Paul is saying that even while we were enemies of God, even while we were literally at war with him, he chose, for no other reason than that he chose to send his son to die for us. He chose to forgive us. He chose to offer us that love and that forgiveness in exchange for the war and the hatred that we were at with the Lord. You know, we moved back to the States when I was 7 years old. So a large part of my life I've spent here, and the early 2000s kind of shaped a lot of, you know, who I am as a person, that formative years and everything. So 9/11 was, for every person in this room, a huge deal when you watch that on the screen. And every year, I mean, I hate when September starts up because it messes with me, it bothers me, it brings back all these emotions. And even now, like, I'm 22 years old, and it still affects me, right? Well, when I look at a verse like Romans 5, talking about how we were enemies of God, it always shocks me because I think of that, like, that is for me in my generation that I represent, that is my enemy. That is my thing that I grew up with, Al-Qaeda, extreme Islam, you know. That's like the Soviet Union, the German, Nazi. That is it, right? And when I think of Romans 5, I put myself in that position. When I was at war with God, he chose to love me. He chose to forgive me. He chose to send his son to die for me all my life. And I love the fact that even though this man was writing he understands the heart of God in that when he says, I will sing of your mercies forever, Lord. I will make your faithfulness you shall establish in the very heavens. And then verse 3, we have kind of a glimpse at the vein that if we follow it will lead us to the heart of this complaint. I have made a covenant with my chosen. I have sworn to my servant David, your seed I will establish forever and build up your throne to all generations, Selah. So here he kind of switches to where he's talking about a declaration, God, the rock of my salvation. And, you know, we remember all of these stories, like just looking at the Gospel of John. You look there in chapter 5 when he is with the Pharisees right after healing the man at Bethesda. And what does he say? Change. And me and the Father are one. I can only do what the Father says for me to do. Exactly Ethan is talking about here. We don't know. It could be, the study that I did, I couldn't even find conclusively a spot to actually put his timeline. You know, this could have been taking place during the reign of Solomon's son. It could have been taking place during the reign of Zedekiah when he was taken off the throne by Babylon. We don't know, but what we do know is that the throne affected by whatever's going on. Is God truly faithful? And, you know, I brought up all of that about Psalms with all of the massiveness of it and everything because, like I've already mentioned, the Psalms deal with every season in our life. This is obviously a really dark season that this guy is going through, and we get a privilege, okay? And that's one thing I don't think that I view the Scripture as a privilege. You know, it's a privilege to read the book of Psalms because here are men who have struggled and written down their thoughts, and here I get to go benefit from that. No, here I get to go be encouraged because of their suffering. I get to go drink from the wells that they dug in the wilderness, right? And it's a beautiful thing. But it still doesn't negate the fact that sometimes we're faced with incredible. You know, there was this one day, there was this one season in my life where I was struggling, you know, like materialized his words into something physical and then like strangled him with them in that moment. That would have given me joy, okay? Because in a moment like that, whenever you don't feel joy, guess what? There's probably not a lot of joy in your life. You know, when you're weak, you're not strong. And that's one of the things that you carry from this chapter, from this particular place, is that this is a man who is a godly man, a man who is dedicated to the Lord, and he is being brutally honest in that, you know what, if the joy of the Lord is my strength, I'm weak. That I had read earlier from Campbell Morgan, when he says that this is possibly one of the best examples of how a godly man handles a terrible situation. Because if you notice throughout all of this, he sets up a precedent for us to follow. And there's actually 4 things I think we can pull from this. If you go and get the last slide. It's 4 things. First, you can see that while this is a godly man who loves the Lord, I believe deeply loves the Lord, he is faced with a dilemma. He's faced with something that he feels he can't overcome. So he dwells on faith. The majority of this chapter deals with faith. Now, I think that's really important because I think this is actually an opportunity for us to see into the life of a saint who was dealing with faith and no feeling. I don't think this guy was feeling much of what he was before. And that's the idea that we have here, right? That's the idea that we're going through. He's going through a tough thing, but he keeps going. The second thing that I noticed from this is that he's honest. He's brutally honest. He's not only honest about what's happening in the country and about this, king life, and what you're left with is faith, because it doesn't do you any good. You just have to put one foot in front of the other and hold on to God and hold on in faith. And the third thing that I pull from this, and on that one note of be honest, I guess I should really not leave that till I say that's, a way that we are to imitate this guy. Don't be afraid of actually going before God with your full complaint. If you've had a friend for any amount of time, then you've had an argument. If you've had a family member that you love, then you've had a disagreement, and you might even have done some kind of knockout, drag-out thing. I don't know. But those things strengthen relationships. It's the same with God. If there's something he's doing in your life that you don't understand, bring your whole complaint before him. Lay it at his feet. He can handle it. He's big enough for it. And another interesting thing about this psalm is there's not a rebuke. Not one rebuke in the entire thing. The third thing that I see from this, actually you can pick up from verses 5, and I'll wrap it up with this. Verses 5 through 5 through 7, where he talks about being in the assembly. Actually, it's just verse 7. I'm sorry, I got all discombobulated looking down at my Bible. God is greatly to be feared in the assembly of the saints and to be held in reverence by those around him. And actually that whole section there talks about saints as plural, that this man didn't just struggle, but he kept himself in the sanctuary. He kept himself around other Christians. You remember that Pastor Mike brought up at the beginning, and he'll probably bring it up next Sunday because he did this at the beginning of this last book, that every book in the Psalms kind of correlates with one of the first 5 books of the Bible. This one correlates with Leviticus being the book in the Psalms that has to deal with the sanctuary and what goes on inside the sanctuary and who are the people that come to the sanctuary and what happens when you're in that sanctuary. What happens when that sanctuary becomes, threatened and all these different things. And we've covered all these Psalms in the last 17 that have been all of book 3. But here we end on a note of a man who is talking about not forsaking that sanctuary, not forsaking being around other saints, even though he's going through something that he doesn't know if he can make it through. And I love that example, that we end this book with that picture of a man who is struggling and he is living on faith and he is confused and he is down, but you know what? He's staying in the sanctuary. He's bringing it because this isn't just a social club, right? And if it is, it's a pretty weird social club. You guys are listening to a 22-year-old talk for like 30 minutes. That's not normal, right? So we are here because we live life together, and the end goal is to get to eternity. The only way we're going to do that, ladies and gentlemen, is if we actually live life together. And sometimes life has a lot of Psalm 89 moments where you just keep going, where you don't feel a lot, but you act on faith because that's what God has instilled in you to do. And every season comes to an end, and you hold on to that. And the fourth thing that I have there, verse 52,